Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Holly Edgell. When St. Louisan Alyson Thompson watched the Loving Generation documentary, she instantly felt heard and affirmed in her identity of being born to one black and one white parent. It also prompted her to start Mixed Feelings, a group for multiracial people seeking community among other multiracial and multiethnic individuals. This happens through curated meetups and events. The group returns from hiatus in a couple of weeks. St. Louis on the Air producer Lara Hamdan recently sat down with Mixed Feelings founder Alyson Thompson. She began by asking Thompson when it was that she became aware of her identity.
I think I had always been aware that I was mixed because it was fairly obvious to me that my mom and dad looked different. I think it became really important to me and affected my life more when I started middle school. And so there were kind of all of the other, problems that come up in middle school where everybody's trying to figure out who they are and who they're hanging out with, and you're going through puberty and all of those things. And I think for me, growing up in the South in particular as well, I grew up in Georgia at the time, is where I was going to elementary school and middle school. It was a pretty diverse school outside of Atlanta, but there was a lot of self-segregation of similar ethnicities or races of kids hanging out with each other. And there definitely was some mixture, but for me, it was kind of another category that I had to choose of who am I going to hang out with? How am I going to identify? And so initially I was just I look black on the outside. I'm aware that my mom is white, but I'm going to start hanging out with the black kids. And I kind of quickly noticed that I was different from a lot of other black kids and started to notice my skin tone was different. And that was kind of a problem for some people or a point of interest for others, and kind of always kept being brought up, or my hair or the way that I spoke, things like that. And so I kind of felt on the outside a bit like I didn't belong, and was still figuring that out. I was still young, I didn't have race theory studied or understood colorism at the time or anything like that. And kind of started hanging out with a lot of white kids as well, and just kind of felt like I was hopping around and didn't quite feel like anywhere I kind of fully belonged until I would maybe come across a mixed kid and was like, oh, we get each other. And those would sort of be moments of I feel seen and affirmed. And everywhere else you're like, okay, we're friends, but you also keep pointing out all the ways that I'm different a lot, and that kind of affects you over time.
When was that point then when you did become more intellectually aware of what your identity meant?
I think in high school, it started to hit me that, wow, a lot of my life, I've grown up in a lot of predominantly white spaces, whether it was churches or schools or neighborhoods or things like that. And there's just something in me that kind of, because every once in a while I would have a moment of remembering, oh, my family looks different, or I look different. And you kind of just get in survival mode for a long time. And you kind of step outside of yourself and your experience and are oh, I'm the only black person at this wedding, or my family's the only family of color at this event or in this space. So that kind of started to happen more and more, and then I started to bring it up to other people and notice they were uncomfortable by me talking about it, and so kind of didn't bring it up a lot, and I was trying to just kind of survive in those spaces. But I was doing a lot of suppression over my life, and I think I started to get tired of it and notice that it was affecting me. And when I went to college, in undergrad, I eventually chose sociology and global studies as my major and minor. And even just studying, sociology and racial theory and hearing about the word colorism and those sorts of things was oh, and I kind of was able to to see my life in a different way and had language for the experiences that I had. And that really started the major process of a lot of unpacking my experience, my identity, really digging into who am I as a multiracial person? What do I claim? How do I identify?
And so what led you to start Mixed Feelings?
There was a documentary that came out last year, sort of memorializing, celebrating, recognizing the 50th anniversary of Loving versus Virginia, which basically made it legal for interracial couples to be married, for mixed kids to be born, to exist. And so they were basically talking about different aspects of life. And just the topics that they talked about, I felt really seen and affirmed in my experience, and realized I haven't gotten to have these conversations a lot, and I wasn't able to talk back to them. But I was just like, I hear you, and I'm just like, I'm really thankful that you're saying these things. And there was one point where one of the people that was being interviewed talked about being in college and was all of a sudden aware that he was standing in a group of mixed people talking about their experiences, and he said, I'd never been in a group of mixed people before. And that statement in particular really hit me and kind of sparked this idea of, wait, I've never been in a group of mixed people before, but I do know many multiracial, multiethnic, mixed people in my life. All I have to do is just say, hey, all of you, come to this one place, and we can like share our stories, talk about our experiences, our lives, and basically have this experience that all of us were having in watching this film, because I was reaching out to different people saying, hey, have you heard of this documentary? And all of them felt, even though not all of them identified with the mixtures that people were in the documentary, there was so much resonance that they hadn't been able to have with most of the people in their lives.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on why you called it Mixed Feelings?
Yeah, it's sort of a play on words, obviously, being mixed. And I think that we all have a lot of feelings about it. And a lot of them can be defined as mixed feelings. I think because our conversations about race in this country are really difficult to have. Like, we don't really, race as a social construction is kind of constantly shifting and changing for different people's preferences, and whoever's in power kind of has a say over how we're talking about race. And it's been such a heavy and intense topic, especially lately in our country. We live in this very binary society where everything is literally black and white, and there isn't room for nuanced conversation. And so a lot of people struggle with, how do I identify in this multitude of who I am? Do I pick and choose? And so there is a kind of a lot of people that say, like, yeah, I do have mixed feelings about like how I identify, how I exist in this world. And so I thought it was kind of a fun name to pick. I almost called it mixology, but I didn't want people to get confused about it being some sort of alcohol event or something.
Well, Mixed Feelings really does, I think, hit the nail on the spot. But when did you start it?
So I started it early last year, and it really was just kind of reaching out to friends and saying, hey, come meet up in this space and like, let's talk, let's introduce ourselves. So a lot of people that came initially, I knew most of them, or they were friends of friends. And really how it started was I just put it out there on social media, like, hey, I just saw these films. I have this idea. Does anybody else resonate? Has anybody else seen this? Does anybody else want to have this kind of meetup with this, like, help anybody? And people that were multiracial, or like people that had friends that were, they're like, you should totally run with this. This would be really amazing. And yeah, so we just started having a few meetups, and people really latched onto it, and the word really got out there. And so I kind of paused it for a bit of like, okay, this isn't just like friends meeting up in a living room anymore. Like, this could really become something. And so I paused it for a good bit, and then had been working on just developing like what I wanted it to become and getting a good foundation to it.
And now it's back on track?
So I'm going to be relaunching it in June. I haven't picked the date yet, but it will be announced shortly. It'll either be mid or end of June. So it'll be relaunched into various kinds of events, so not just discussion-based meetups, but really centering on community building in various ways through private meetups, whether that's discussion-based meetups or low-key parties or film screenings, things like that, because I know not everybody wants to show up to a space and be super vulnerable with strangers and talk about their stories. And even in the discussion meetups, people are free to just come and listen. That doesn't always happen. Usually people eventually do jump in because they're like, whoa, like me too. And people kind of hop on. But it's really just for people to be there, to listen, to share as they feel comfortable.
What's been the experience like for people attending this group? And also, what kind of backgrounds do they come from?
It's really fascinating at the meetups. Folks may be shy at the beginning, or you're kind of figuring out how's the conversation going to go. And really, once you get one or two people started, other folks will begin to see a piece of their story reflected in somebody else. And there's a lot of like piggybacking or like expanding on different topics, even again if people come from different backgrounds of mixture. And there's kind of all types of mixture. There are folks that are Mexican and Black, or Black and white, or kind of even more than that, like maybe they're Native American and Black and white, or some folks are Korean and white. And and I think just for me, I kind of grew up knowing a lot of like Black and white mixed folks. And so to kind of have people that are mixed with things that aren't just mixed with white, that was fascinating, because that I think helps you to see your story in a different way. And there are people that maybe like white passing, and some of those folks asked if they're allowed to come, but they're like half Mexican as well. And it's like, of course you can come, and we should definitely talk about that, and like why you don't feel that you can like identify with that aspect of yourself, or like identify or come to a space with other mixed folks.
In your Facebook description for why you put this together, you had wrote that even when people have different mixtures, many of the frustrations and quirks are similar. What are some of those quirks and similarities?
Yeah, a big thing is other people's interactions with us can be, a lot of people ask, what are you, if you look racially ambiguous, and that's sort of a weird question to answer. It kind of sounds dehumanizing. And I think we all understand like why people ask that, but I think that's a really common encounter, is just dealing with other people's, either it's awkwardness or just blatant racism about our existence, and kind of all of the weird questions and interactions that come from that. There is the experience of dealing with the other box, in like standardized tests or census or different things like that, where for a long time, for a lot of us growing up, depending on our age, we didn't get to choose kind of all of our ancestry, or the mixtures that we were. We kind of had to choose one, and eventually you were able to check the other box, which felt really weird because it didn't reflect who you were at all. It was just other, and sometimes you could fill in the blank. So if you bring up the other box to mixed folks, they're like, oh yeah, I remember that, and kind of reflecting on those things. Yeah, so I think that those are really big ones.
Yeah. In your personal spheres, like, is there ever pressure to relate to one side, more to one side than the other?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I know for a lot of folks that are mixed with Black, it's a pretty like common thing for people to just feel pressure to just identify as Black. I know, especially early on, right after like Loving versus Virginia was passed, it was like definitely a political act to identify as Black and to be a Black person in this world, and not sort of let yourself maybe be diluted by whiteness or whatever else you were mixed with. and to be proud of that Blackness, I think, at a time when, and I mean, we still are, just when Blackness, it was really, looked down on, and there was so much hurt and shame and pain around that. And so I think for a lot of people, though, I think that's the other common thing that you'll hear in conversation is I'm not something enough, whatever they're mixed with, because they're mixed with something else. Whatever group that they want to identify with, it can be internalized, it could be a projected thing, or it could be something that people are actually saying to them that they basically need to prove themselves as being, Black enough or Mexican enough or whatever it is, because it's sort of seen as like if you're mixed with something, you're half of that or you're only part that, instead of being fully all of those things and being able to be a part of all of those groups simultaneously.
That's Mixed Feelings founder and organizer Alyson Thompson talking with St. Louis on the Air producer Lara Hamdan. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be back to continue this conversation in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
And welcome back. For those now joining the conversation, we're talking with Alyson Thompson, founder and organizer of Mixed Feelings. St. Louis on the Air producer Lara Hamdan asked Thompson how she feels looking back at the impact of the Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court case that deemed criminalization of interracial relationships unconstitutional.
It hasn't been a long time. And so I think it actually does have a lot to say if we're talking about racial progress, to remember that was only 50 years ago. And so that is actually a really big problem that it was so recent. And when we're talking about racial progress, it's important to also not say that mixed people are the solution to racism, or that we're post-racial because interracial couples are able to be together and mixed kids are able to exist, because we don't want to say that basically erasing races is a sign of success, or racial ambiguity is a sign of success, because when you kind of look at other parts of the world as well, mixing people together to basically breed multiracial children was used as a way to erase particularly Black folks in a lot of parts of the world where there were a lot of enslaved people. And so we have to be careful about that, and also the fetishizing of mixed babies and kids, and that they're more beautiful than just regular old, not mixed people. And also, again, to kind of remember that it has been legal, for 50 years, but our existence has been around since the beginning. And so I think it is important in terms of the safety and the affirming of our existence. I think that was really huge and really important. And I think for me, it's kind of a lot of like ancestral work too, of just thinking about all of the mixed folks or interracial couples that had to hide who they were, or were in danger, or didn't get to exist in public or in safety, or were cut off from their families in a lot of ways, that didn't have fathers or mothers, didn't get to have a whole family. And so that's the space that I wanted to create, is like, yeah, we are allowed to exist in this world, and I don't want us to just talk about our negative and hard experiences. That's a big part of it, but I want us to celebrate what that means, and to really be a part of actively pushing a nuanced conversation around race forward in these private spaces and in public too.
Where do you hope to take Mixed Feelings?
Yeah, there's so many directions it can go in, but I really just want to keep doing these events, really keep building community and helping people to really feel strong in the ways that they identify, however they choose to do that, and that they heal through just being in community, whatever that looks like, whether it's the community that we have around a dance party or a storytelling event or sitting around talking to each other, whatever these events become. I really just want to give people space to heal and space to become, and that they don't have to arrive at an identity, that they realize that they can evolve, that they can not identify as anything specifically, but really even just grappling with what they experienced in their lives and healing from that and feeling affirmed and making friends with people. And I really want people who don't identify in those ways to really begin to understand and be educated about not just the ways that they're interacting with mixed folks, but yeah, just when they think about having families or employing folks or just being in conversations, just talking about race in general, that it will help to give them language. And also, I mean, I'm all for people being in interracial relationships and having mixed kids, but I really want them to consider to do a lot of work on themselves individually around race and racial bias and racism, and how to intentionally raise their children to think about their identity, to think about race and the impact that it has on each of us. And I think for a lot of us, our parents kind of entered into relationships of like, I just love this person and I'm going to do it. And a lot of their parents are like, don't do this. Or a lot of them, you know, were disowned by their families for making those choices. And it was kind of an act of rebellion, or I love this person. And for some people, it was a way to like solve racism. And there wasn't a lot of work beyond that. I can't speak for everybody's individual experiences, but for a lot of kids, they didn't have intentional conversations about race. And they weren't, neither of their parents understood them. And I know for me, my parents actually didn't bring it up until a couple years ago. And, you know, I'm 28 years old, almost 29. And it's important, really, to kind of actively and intentionally have these conversations with your kids and make them feel safe to have these conversations, to talk about their experiences at school that were really difficult. A lot of kids are bullied even still. I have parents and aunts and uncles that approach me about their kids being in middle school and being bullied or really struggling. And of course, I really resonate with that. As I said earlier, it's middle school for a lot of people is when it really hits them, when they have to start thinking about these things a lot.
For those who identify as mixed race that want to keep up with this support group, where can they find more information about that?
So we're primarily on Instagram. The handle is Mixed Feelings STL. We do have a private Facebook discussion group, and then eventually a public Facebook group where people can find out more about us. And then for people who aren't on social media, we'll have Eventbrite events when things are open to the public. And then I'm hoping to eventually launch a website for it as well, with resources and event updates and all those sorts of things.
And for now, people can start looking forward to learning more next month, June?
Yes, yeah. So that will be announced on social media and Eventbrite as well. You can also find my personal tag at Alyson, Alyson Thompson, and I'll be posting about it on my page too. I know that it can be intimidating for folks to come to a group of people that they have never met before, and primarily with discussion-based meetups, that can be scary in a space of vulnerability. And so I just want to offer myself as a person for people to reach out to meet up with for coffee or drinks or a walk in the park, just to have somebody else that that shares that experience and can kind of go from there moving into these more group events. So I'm happy to chat with people about that. Obviously, I don't have all the time in the world or all the capacity, but I'm happy to chat with folks and see if that would be something that would be helpful as they kind of ease into these events. And these events are really low-key and safe, and we'll be covering different topics in our discussion meetups. There'll be topics on the storytelling events as well. And so initially we're just going to be introducing ourselves to each other, meeting each other, really trying to know each other's names and things like that. And then we'll kind of dig deeper into various topics like family and school and dating, relationships, kids, workplace, just kind of whatever we're noticing keeps coming up in conversation that people want to dig deeper into. So I think that that's an important thing to know about too. And so when we announce the events, we'll announce like, this is what we're going to be talking about. And obviously there's so much overlap, like you can't just stick with a certain topic, but just to kind of give some guidance to the conversation. And again, just acknowledging not everybody wants to show up to that space, and that's not the only way to build community. So if people don't feel comfortable with that, we'll have more low-key, like kickback events and things like that. So I'm hoping to call one of them Mixology, just to kind of bring that name back. They don't have to drink alcohol, but I just love playing around with that and, calling it a mixed mixer or something. So.
Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you so much.
That was Alyson Thompson, founder and organizer of Mixed Feelings, a group dedicated to building community among multiracial and multiethnic individuals through curated meetups and events. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.